We are joined for the first time on GTAA by Yuri Rashkin. Welcome to the show, Yuri.
Thank you for having me. How are you doing?
I am pretty good. So we were getting, we were talking about Dugin on the main show. Thought it'd be interesting to talk to you since you have, as we just apparently saw the beginning of there. If anybody's listening to this as a podcast later, go back and watch the first minute of the video. But we are talking to you because you've actually debated this guy. So tell us about that.
Well, it was thank you for inviting me. It's something that I do from time to time. Is I appear quite regularly in Russian language media worldwide because I came to the United States when I was 13 with my parents, and I basically lived all my life in the United States. I'm a local elected official here in Wisconsin. I've been actually Rock County supervisor here since 2018, and I also served on Janesville City Council for 4 years, 2008 through 2012. So I like politics. I like local politics, and being bilingual, I'm being invited regularly to speak about American policy and to kind of explain things. I'm also kind of a rare thing, also because I'm a progressive. And being a progressive in Russian language space means that there's nobody else. You're in proud, lonely solitude. And therefore, that makes me even more desirable because who else is going to articulate anything remotely like progressive point of view or even center point of view in Russian space? It's very lonely out there. So I got invited on this program with Mr. Dugin, and looking at the stream today to kind of refresh my memory, I realized that this actually took place right after January 6th. And we had a conversation with him where I was saying, I was just, righteous fury. I was outraged about what was happening. I was saying how the country is united against this, insanity that occurred at the Capitol. And he was saying, well, I think America is pretty divided. And, I was like, so on some level, history, bore out to be true. And, he shown to be accurate because America was divided. And even though we had this moment where it seemed like we were all on the same page, it didn't really last. And in part because of the work that Dugin was doing. So thank you. And that's another thing that I think is so interesting is that sometimes I get into these environments where it's hard for me to really understand what they're talking about because I'm behind the propaganda kind of a wagon. And so right after the election, but before January 6th, but after Trump lost, I was invited on Russian state TV to their main propaganda thing. And I had one appearance, and that was enough for me. I just wanted to see what that was like, kind of the experience of the back kitchen of getting scheduled. It's very, they really interview people like before they put them on the air, and then everything is recorded anyway. So it's very produced television, everything scripted. I was asked if I thought that America was going to have Maidan. And Maidan is what happened in Ukraine, where people decided that they could not put up with a dictator, and they came out and they just took over the main square of the capital, and they refused to leave until the dictator ran away. And so I was asked by the main propaganda lady, like, do I think that Maidan could occur in the United States? And I just thought, this is laughable. What are you talking about? How could we? No. And then January 6th happened. And I thought maybe she knew something that I didn't, that maybe she was just more aware of she had some of the insight on some things that were happening. So with Dugin, it's also a little bit of that, but there were some mistakes that he felt that I felt on some, again, reviewing the video, I thought that he was surprisingly well aware of what was happening at the Capitol on January 6th, because he knew then about Ashley Babbitt and that she was a veteran and she was killed. So he's very much attuned to American propaganda, I guess what I would call. And he had this interesting expression. He said the two Americas are looking at each other through a scope of a machine gun. And it turned out, according to Dugin, and that's what January 6th showed to him, is that America is like everybody else. And I think that's also a very important part of generally Russian propaganda, is to tear down America and the West to show that they're just like everybody else. And just like it's kind of a misleading word substitution, because just like is, well, we are human. We are not a magical country. We don't have like unicorns, and we are like anybody else. But that doesn't mean that our corruption, well, up until now, has been at the level of Russia. So like there's still a big distinction between us and them, and just tearing us down, making us look like anybody else is what they want to do. In Russian propaganda, is tear us down of this magical pedestal that they themselves put us on. It's a weird thing. And a big thing that I thought was really a misconception is that Dugin argues that Trump's pro-Russia, like advertised being pro-Russia, was untrue, that Trump really is not pro-Russia, and that is like a false accusation against him, which told me that it was very important for him, for the official party Kremlin line, is to distance distance Russia from Putin at the time, especially after January 6th. But the assumption on Dugin's part is that Biden wasn't going to make relationship with Russia any worse because it's already so bad. All the sanctions have already been used up. Politics will not change. And that's an interesting statement, because if you think that everything is already as bad as it's going to get, and that's before everything that happened after the big invasion of Ukraine, but you already think that you already priced in all the sanctions, then it makes it easier to justify having another invasion, because you go, oh, the sanctions already occurred. So that was a big misjudgment there, I felt, on Dugin's part. But he was fundamentally correct, saying that not all America clearly is for Biden, since people attacked the Capitol, and there's a transformation that awaits that country. So I was like, wow, there's some interesting points there, mixed bag.
Yeah, it is interesting, the thing you said about going on state TV. I'm not a Russian speaker, but I was on the English RT once. That they, I was being interviewed about something that was completely unrelated to Russia or Ukraine or any of that, right? But I do. But I do remember it was like January 2022, and I remember distinctly having the thought, man, I really hope they don't invade Ukraine on the day that I'm doing my RT interview, right? This is going to feel very strange, to watch the feed going on, on the bottom of the screen, if that works out that way. But okay, so you were talking about the connection between Dugin and the American right wing, right? Maybe that's the part that's most interesting to me, and that it's some, and I know that there's even sort of debate about how much influence Dugin even necessarily has on like Putin or the government in Russia, if they sort of like him for certain purposes, but ultimately, they maybe they think he's crazy too, on some level. But how deep do you think those connections go? Right, like this sort of like between Dugin and, let's say, somebody like I don't know, like Steve Bannon, who's who's not obviously in the administration for round two, but is somebody who's important for like the Trump like media sphere, and is and is certainly like an important figure in that world overall and likes to cultivate these connections to sort of nationalist and reactionary forces around the world.
I would be hard pressed to give you specific examples of where Dugin and Steve Bannon cross paths.
Yeah.
I think they play kind of a similar role, but Steve Bannon is much more operational, I feel, than Dugin, who is at this point older and more ideologically, philosophically, driving the conversation. But he reminds me at this point a little bit of Curtis Yarvin. In a sense that you have people who are not particularly smart necessarily, but they provide some kind of a justification for horrible things. And so they're used as like a fig leaf to cover up for certain things that, people just want to do. And I think that there is some speculation about who is the main influence on Putin, whether it is Dugin or is it in fact Ivan Ilyin, who is also a very famous pro-fascist philosopher, early 20th century and mid 20th century, that many people, most Russians don't know. But because Putin has spoken of him, then you go, well, okay, so clearly, if you're going to be quoting him in your speeches and so on, this is an influential figure. Also, Russia has this tendency of having everything be unique and special and selected, in a sense that we have the great writer, we have the great dancer, we have the great philosopher. And, it's not like American approach where we have like a free market and like there's always then the competition for the next one. And there it's like, that's it. Dugin is it. He got on that pedestal. He's going to be there. What does that fit? It fits a dictatorship because that's how Putin is. He is the dude. So there's no like the next dude. It's just the dude. So I think Dugin is now the dude, the philosophy dude. But his ideas, okay, so his daughter was killed in an explosion that was blamed on Ukrainian spies. And in fact, I think there was like a New York Times or somebody saying that perhaps that's exactly what it was. So he's certainly being perceived as an enemy by Ukrainians. And he certainly said a lot of hateful things about Ukraine. And he is being used as justification for horrific things that are being done. And at a war, you're going to have these warlike consequences for people who, become involved. And actually, it was him that was the real target, and his daughter was like the collateral damage. I don't say she was in his place, I guess, but the attack really was clearly meant against him. So he's viewed as somebody who is a hateful enough figure that people are trying to take him out in these kinds of hateful ways. He attracts that kind of attention, I guess. But his specific connection, I think it's interesting that there's a lot of Russian connection, period, in American right wing. And I think that is more fundamentally important than the specific connection to Mr. Dugin. Because I think Richard Spencer's wife or ex-wife was Russian. There's just I struggle. I wasn't thinking about it in terms of connection to American right, but as I recall, there's quite a few Russians that are interconnected there, and in general, they look to Russia as a kind of a, which is, by the way, another crazy thing when we come to and speak about American right wing and all of that jazz. They think that Russia is a white Christian country.
Right.
And that when I say that to Russians, they laugh because they're neither white nor Christian particularly. If anything, they're complaining that their country is becoming more Muslim, Islam, and people from Central Asia, and the Russians are being pushed out. And like, if you look, I think that Moscow has the biggest mosque in Europe now. Like, this is not a white Christian country. Like, what kind of craziness is this? So it's based on a lot of flawed ideas that somehow still are pushed out because Putin wants to connect to the right wing and the left wing, because as long as they're extremists, he's fine with it. And so he has cultivated a lot of connections in right wing all over the world, including America as well.
Yeah. Did you watch Tucker Carlson's Putin interview?
Bits and pieces, yeah.
Yeah. So to me, I mean, to your point about, thinking of it as a white Christian country, the part that I found funniest about it was there's a moment where Carlson kind of tries to get Putin to do some God talk with him, right? He says something like, do you ever get the feeling that there's some larger, hand at play in all these events, and then supernatural, and Putin just, no.
Thank you. I am so glad that you noticed that, because that really stood out to me as well. I thought, you godless mother, like, you really just don't see at all how there could be anything out there. You KGB agent through and through. This is just like, there's just corporation. We're just going to take over. There's no God. What are you talking about? There's just certain laws and rules you have to follow, and that's how it is. And that's how Russia is. There's no laws. There's just like, understandings. And that's how Putin lives.
Yeah. So I thought that the Curtis Yarvin comparison earlier was kind of interesting, right? And of course, that's
friend of show, Curtis Yarvin.
Yeah, I did a debate with Curtis Yarvin in 2022.
I should be interviewing you.
That's if you want to hear about that, but and so it's sort of funny to think that in some ways Dugin might be what Yarvin perhaps would be in a like in a more authoritarian version of the United States, where we really had like somebody who was like the state philosopher figure, right? But it was like Trumpist ideology. I guess it would probably be somebody like Yarvin.
I'm gonna leave if that's gonna be the final straw. If Yarvin becomes the state philosopher, I don't know if I can handle that, but that would be as annoying as possible. Although maybe there's probably someone worse.
I think that's something that is just a reality, though, as it's an idea that's gaining steam, because that's who we hear about the techno bros and broligarchs and Curtis Yarvin in the same sentence pretty often now. I thought that was just the language we speak. That's why I got interested in who this Curtis Yarvin character is, and I thought, wow, what a really weird look at history. When he looks at things and hopes that and makes this like total cherry picking conclusions, when he talks about how all these amazing people reformatted these countries, and it's always after some kind of a cataclysmic catastrophe, which we seem to be lacking, except that they are trying to seem to be creating one, like this is like, are we trying to create that crisis that you clearly are calling for as a necessary for your theory to work?
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting because I did, I guess so. I mean, I debated him in fall 2022, and so that was like kind of just before he got to be more prominent. So I don't know, like his name is certainly bandied about more, and has been, maybe since like JD Vance, was picked as Trump's running mate, because Vance will like refer to Yarvin as like a friend and an influence, and so probably the most time I spend talking to like people in like mainstream media organizations is when they're writing about him, and they get in touch because of that, which is not necessarily the lane that I want to be in. That I'm the local Curtis Yarvin expert, but
well, I am the local Dugin expert, so there you go.
There you go.
I mean, you made me draw him, and I always think like this guy looks like he smells of like rotten cheese.
Well, we're in the post game here. We'll cut this if we put this out as a clip. I will say he doesn't smell good. Like that's like he really doesn't. Like that was actually like literally the first thought that passed through my head meeting him. Right, like he's a smoker, but I don't think that doesn't bother me that much. Right, like it's not just it's not just the cigarette smell. Something else is going on there.
Yeah. Well, also like if I looked at pictures of him, because like, you, like I said, you made me draw him. So I noticed like after his wife passed away, like his physical appearance, like kind of deteriorated. like he's put on some weight, his hair got worse. Hair was always bad, but it was just like they could doll him up a little bit before then. And I'm just like, yeah, I don't think he's in a good place. Like just emotionally, that's
well, I suppose that actually makes me feel a little bit bad for him, but yeah, fair enough. I mean, I guess like
was it like a smell of sulfur?
I don't know. I haven't spent enough time around sulfur to people really have that reference. But yeah, I mean, I guess like, okay, so Yarvin started out as a libertarian, and he sort of got increasingly authoritarian, but I guess it's all sort of in this weird quasi-libertarian way that it's like, oh, just like genius tech CEOs need to have all the power so they can unleash all this innovation that's wonderful, right? We just need that for the country. But Dugin is somebody who's like more frankly illiberal than just about anybody else I can think of that I've like seen like opine in public, right? Like I remember he did this debate a few years ago with Bernard Henri Levy, who's, I mean, whatever. I don't like either of those people, but like, I watched the debate, and in there, Dugin actually has a line about how like people don't have rights against the state, or they shouldn't, any more than he was like, then your hand has a right against the rest of your body. But like also the thing that's maybe interesting to me about that is that usually if somebody was taking that kind of position, which is, sort of outright fascistish sort of view, right? You'd think that they would just kind of say, this is the truth in the way. Whereas Dugin sort of doesn't, like in that debate, right, with Henri Levy, and also in other things I've seen from him, he kind of does this weird right-wing version of like postmodern relativism, where he's just like, well, everybody gets their own values, right? You get your values, so, Chinese civilization can have Chinese values. Sure, Western civilization can have liberal Western values. That's all fine, right? We just get like our own Russian values. And that's at least to me, that seems like a really strange and disconcerting combination of positions, that sort of like ultra authoritarianism kind of in the name of local autonomy almost.
I think that's again, a great observation, because I think those are things that are associated both with Dugin and with Russian world approach. Because there's this Ruski Mir, Russian world, where on one hand, it is very pro-fascist and very pro-state and pro-authoritarian point of view. But on the other hand, the point of it is the same, whether it's RT or Fox News, is we destroy the truth. We destroy the idea that there is actually even single truth. We go for the idea that it's okay, where everybody has their own truth, and that means that our point of view has just as much legitimacy as your point of view. Again, goes back to, I guess Americans are just like everybody else. There is no the people, there's just everybody. You have your truth, and we can be eating people. Everybody does their own thing, Stop over for dinner.
Well, that's a good enough line. I'm tempted to leave it off there, but I do want to just ask about one other thing while I've still got you, which is, you said something earlier about, in your conversation with Dugin, he is, he's denying sort of the affinity for Russia on the part of Trump, and this is you said just after January 6th is when you were talking. Yeah, so this is like right at the tail end of the first Trump administration, and back then, I mean, it seems like there's a sense in which what he's saying is true, right? I mean, like that the actual is as difficult as this is to remember, because everybody has changed positions on this since then. One of the big Republican criticisms on foreign policy of the Obama administration was that Obama wasn't tough enough on Putin, and that he wouldn't send heavier weapons to Ukraine. And at the beginning of the first Trump administration, Trump actually did, right? Like Trump actually did send weapons to Ukraine that Obama hadn't been willing to. He was very militantly opposed to like the Nord Stream pipeline. There was definitely like clashes with he, even in terms of like Syria, he seemed to be willing to sort of take a bolder line there, right? Like so this is all stuff that it's like I feel like nobody talks about because it doesn't really serve anybody's narrative anymore, right? But this was part of the first Trump administration, but like very much not the second Trump administration, right? I mean this is the second Trump administration. I mean we had that bizarre scene at the White House where like I was saying with the conversation with Kuba in the main show. I mean like it sort of felt like Trump thought that he could do like an Apprentice season finale kind of conversation where he fired Zelensky. And that would sort of be enough to draw the war in Ukraine to
fired. Yep.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. That's like he's just going to tell him he's fired, and that would be that, right? Because that's obviously how the world works. So I guess I mean I wonder what's going on there. That there has been. There has been such a pivot, right? Like, I mean, I wonder if you think that's just because like the first Trump administration was still staffed by a lot of very like establishment kind of Republicans, and that those people are pretty much all gone now, right? So you do have the sort of eccentric preferences of Elon Musk and JD Vance and all these people are being catered to, or is there something going on here that I'm missing? I mean, why? I mean, to the extent that you accept the premise that there has been a big change, right, between the two versions.
Don't.
Okay, why you don't? Okay, so yeah, I want to hear about that.
Well, I think there's a couple of things that are happening because it's almost like a flat Earth versus round Earth kind of a situation. The reason that society ended up accepting that Earth was round and revolving around the sun is because otherwise this astronomy just didn't make sense. It like nothing was lining up right. Everything was off. It was like the things were coming up, but but if you like rearrange things, everything made sense.
Add some episode. Yeah, sure. Right. Okay. Yep.
And I think that we're kind of in a similar situation because if we presume that Trump was always, like last 40 years, working to promote Russian Soviet agenda in every possible way he could, then things start to line up pretty well because those talking points of the Kremlin propaganda that you've just recited so perfectly about Obama not doing enough, about Trump sending javelins, about Nord Stream 2 and the Syrian affair, which are like the list used by Trump apologists for years to show that Democrats were no good, and therefore Trump was the one who really was going to be hard on Putin, even though Trump, I don't know, just for starters, announced to John Bolton that he wanted to leave NATO. I mean, like, that's kind of overpowers the 40 freaking javelins that actually weren't even allowed to, Ukraine wasn't allowed to use them, and they were supposed to be like stored away from the front line. And that's why Trump got his first impeachment, because he was trying to get from Zelensky more than he was already, like Congress said, give it. And Trump said, well, but you just got to give us one more favor. So there's always a pro-Russia approach, and it was always pro-Russia policy because, yes, Obama's sanctions did not crush Russia. I think, honestly, Obama thought that Hillary was going to be after him, and she was going to continue pressing down, on Putin's regime, but it didn't work. And I think the same problem with Biden, because if these people understood that after them will be Trump, who's going to just go full Russia blast, they would maybe do more during their presidency to stop and the Russian threat. Because like the Nord Stream 2 that you mentioned, by the time Biden showed up, it was 95% finished. So there's certain things that were effectively done under Trump that were all working towards Russian favor. Even the Syrian thing, there was some situation, I think, where American troops were going to get, like they were getting attacked by Russian private army. So there was like some specific situation that had to occur. But overall, the Trump was always pro-Russia, pro-Putin. He published pro-Soviet Union, anti-NATO advertisements in New York Times in the mid-'80s after going to Soviet Union. And I can tell you, as having grown up in Soviet Union, I left when I was 13 with my parents. People just weren't like American millionaires wandering into Soviet Union without being surrounded by KGB, because of course, I mean, there weren't that many foreigners. Like if you met a foreigner, you know, there's usually somebody following them, kind of a thing. So an American millionaire shows up to like look at a tower thing. Come on. So all of this was very clear. And I think that the unfortunate consequence of all of this disinformation really is that a lot of people who are very unhappy with Biden because they felt that he was not doing enough to help Ukraine ended up voting for Trump and giving him the victory, essentially, because there's a lot of people of Russian, Ukrainian descent who hate Putin, who support Ukraine, but thought that Trump was going to be better than Biden. In Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in Wisconsin, where I live, in all of these states where it could have been the margin, because they were unhappy with Biden not doing enough, and they were thinking that Trump was going to do more. Interestingly, I understand that there's a similar disappointment going on in Palestinian community, where they also felt that Biden was horrible and Trump couldn't be worse. And then, you know, I mean, now Trump just says he wants the, you know, Palestinians to move out of Gaza, you know, all together. So I think that those kinds of disillusionments that were based on incorrect understanding of what was happening, it's like flat earth situation. Once we figure out that Trump is going to do everything to help, I mean, we just don't have a president right now who has our country's best interests at heart. It is so like, well, if you see that, then you go, oh, okay, then it makes sense what he's trying to do. Because if we look at him and go, he's just a terrible doctor, you know, this is bad. But if we go, oh, he's just working for the other team and he's trying to destroy the country, oh, then things start to line up and make sense. And I am fascinated to watch how much more Americans are going to take of this, because when Americans are going to figure out that our president is just working for Russia, I want to see what America is going to do, because I believe that America is not Russia. Disagree with me if you must. And in Russia, what happened? There's a battle described between the TV and the refrigerator. And in Russia, TV won. Like, refrigerator is empty, but TV says, we're doing great. And people are like, we're doing great. And so my viewers seem to think that TV always wins. But I hope that America, fridge is going to rule the day. And when the fridge gets empty, we're going to be like, no way, this is not going to work. This is not going to pass. But time will tell. Maybe TV has more power than I even thought.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really that compelled by the idea that, I mean, in some ways, I'd actually find it comforting to believe that the sort of, you know, Trump as 1980s communist KGB agent who was then retained as 1990s capitalist Yeltsinite agent, going into Putinism. I mean, that would be, for all the reasons I find that unlikely, it would at least be sort of comforting, because there's a sort of stability and predictability that you get from that. I think that there's a kind of volatility that I think that the real Trump has. And, I would point out that, if, he didn't succeed in stopping the Nord Stream pipeline, he also didn't succeed in leaving NATO, right? So he talked about it, right? Or, certainly oftentimes he seemed to be sort of trying to, browbeat, other countries into spending more on military commitments, right? So they're ripping us off, by not devoting enough military resources to it. But that's, I think that I suspect that the specific horribleness of Trump can't be blamed on your homeland. But
I have a viewer who suggested a theory that Trump just lost America to Russia in poker.
Okay, fair enough. Well, that's as good a theory as any. But in any case, Yuri, thank you for joining us. Where can people find your work?
Rashkin Report is my YouTube channel, and Rashkin Report in English is the places where I would suggest and ask everyone to check out. If you speak Russian, then Rashkin Report, and if you speak English, then Rashkin Report in English.
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive postgames on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.